Good morning, everyone. This is John Shaw, the director of the Paul Simon Public Policy Institute at Southern Illinois University. Thanks for joining another edition of our series, Understanding Our New World. We're delighted to be joined by Ambassador Barbara Bodine. The ambassador is the director of the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University. She's had a wonderful, interesting career. She was born in St. Louis, grew up in Los Angeles, studied at the University of California, Santa Barbara, went to graduate school in international affairs at the Fletcher School, and then joined the Foreign Service and has had a wonderful 30-year career in diplomacy with key posts in Iraq, Kuwait, and as ambassador to Yemen. And as I said, she's the director of the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown University. So Ambassador, thank you so much. And let's begin at the beginning. You were a 15-year-old girl, 16 years old, living in Los Angeles, and you decided you wanted to be a diplomat. Tell us that story and how you became enamored with the profession of diplomacy and the challenge of being an American diplomat.
I did grow up in California, and in the west end of the San Fernando Valley. And if anybody knows that, it's sort of the back of the beyond. And I was fortunate to be selected for a summer class on international relations between my junior and senior year. And I still think of him as a professor, had representatives of the consulate generals in Los Angeles come out and talk to us. And I already was kind of a wonky kid. I read the, LA Times front to back every day. And LA schools are these spread out things. So somebody had to go to the flagpole and meet these people and get them to our class. And as one of the girls in the class, I got the protocol job. But I got to talk to these guys. And I discovered that I could take my interest in international affairs and do something with it. And, back in that day, there weren't a lot of career opportunities for women. It was very, very narrow. And I remember asking this one diplomat, I think he was the Brit, what's this diplomacy thing you do? I had no idea. And so he explained it to me, and I said, well, that's great. Can I join? And he says, actually, you have your own. That's how ignorant I was. And so I started researching the Foreign Service. And I decided as a 15-year-old to go into the Foreign Service, to be an American diplomat, and then started actually having to learn, well, what is it? And what kind of degree do I need? And what do I need to do? So that was a major turning point. The other major turning point was I talked my way into an education abroad program my junior year of college and went to Hong Kong for a year. And I spent a lot of time at the consulate there, just getting to know the diplomats. They were extremely patient with this little college junior who probably they probably saw me more as a groupie than anything. But I learned, who are these people? What do they do? What are their careers like? And just became more and more convinced that this was the path. I did a couple of things that no student should ever do. I applied to only one undergraduate school because I liked their China program. And then I applied to only one graduate school. And so I think I overworked my guardian angels because I kept making it tough on them. Passed the exam, and 3 weeks after I got my master's, I was in the Foreign Service and never looked back.
Well, Ambassador, tell us what the Foreign Service looked like when you entered. I know you were probably one of the relatively few women in your class. Tell us about, gender, racial composition. What did the Foreign Service look like back then?
The Foreign Service was the epitome of the mantra, pale, male, and Yale. There were 2 women in my entering class, 2. And there were, I think, 6 African-American men. Diversity was not our strong suit. in those days. We're still working on it, but it wasn't even close. And I actually came in as a political cone officer, one of the 5 that we have now. And on my 3rd day in the Foreign Service, this is what I have wanted to do since I was 15. I finally get in. I've made it. And on my 3rd day, the director of the course called me in and said, by the way, a woman cannot be a political officer. What do I know? His reasons were really, even to me then, stupid. But I instinctively knew his answers were wrong, but I didn't know what the right answer was. And fortunately, as I walked out of his office, clearly in shock because everything had just collapsed, there was a senior advisor to the course, a former ambassador who literally, I think he physically caught me as I came out of the office. And I told him what happened, and he said, no, we're changing. And I didn't change my cone. I was a political officer. But the Foreign Service was the story that I do love to tell that really shows how it was still in the process of changing. On my 2nd tour, I was a political military officer in Bangkok. And I didn't know this, but my boss, or my about to be boss, didn't think women should be in the Foreign Service, didn't think women should be political officers, and was hell-bent that he was not going to have a woman political military officer. I didn't know this. And I get there, and he put me in a smaller back office, which, given that I was a 2nd tour officer, was reasonable. But as I looked around, I realized that my office had the coffee pot, the refrigerator, and a hot plate. He put me in the kitchen. Clear, not subtle. I really had to figure out how to deal with that. And he was the 3rd ranking person in a very large embassy, and I was a 2nd tour officer. At the end of a longer story, he was removed from the embassy, sent back to Washington, told to retire, and a new political military counselor came in whose first question to me was, do you think being a woman is an obstacle to being a political military officer? To which I said, no. And he said, neither do I. And I want you to be my special assistant. So there were these unbelievable jerks. There were more good guys.
And then your initial, I know you're an Asian studies major in Santa Barbara, and that was your initial inclination. But then you made a kind of a fateful decision to sort of broaden your horizons and see a bit of the Persian Gulf and the Arabian Peninsula, and your career turned. Talk about that.
Yeah, I did do my first 3 tours in Asia, which is where I thought I was going to be, what I wanted to do. But I did figure out that I needed to broaden myself a little bit. And my good boss helped get me a job on the 7th floor, which is where all the big people work, as a very junior staff person. And then I got recruited by the Middle East Bureau to work on the Office of Arabian Peninsula Affairs. And I had a great deal of respect for the Bureau, but I had to tell the people who were recruiting me, honestly, I'm not sure I've met an Arab. Hong Kong, Taiwan, and Bangkok did not have large Arab communities. And they said, that's fine. That's not what we're hiring you for. My plan was I did Yemen and Saudi Arabia, to do it for 2 years, see a little bit more of the world, get a little bit more of a global perspective, become a more well-rounded officer. And I did my first orientation trip out to the region, where I went to all of the Gulf states, Yemen and Saudi Arabia. And I came back and said, I want to stay. And they said, fine, you have to learn Arabic. And then, as they say, the rest is history. I never went back to Asia. I fell in love with the Middle East, and that was my career.
Well, let's talk about one of the postings. I know this is kind of moving up ahead, but you had a posting to Iraq, I guess during the Iran-Iraq war. So this was the 1980s. What was it like then? I mean, Saddam Hussein's Iraq up close. What was that like to be there?
It was ghastly. There's not a nicer way to put it. First of all, the regime. I had some colleagues who had served in the Soviet Union, which was not considered a happy place. And they said that it was downright, lovely compared to Saddam's Iraq. It's hard to explain, but you can feel fear. It's like fog. You can see it, you can feel it, you can't get your hands on it. It's always just a little bit there, but you could feel the fear in the city and the country and the fear in the people of their government. It was palpable. We did not feel secure as diplomats. We were extremely constrained in what we could do. I've never seen a regime like that. It was extremely difficult. It was also hard living because we had power outages, we had water outages, we had trouble getting food because there was the Iran-Iraq war going on. And I do remember one time sitting with my economics officer, and we were literally sitting on the edge of the sofas like this. So, because it was so hot, it was over 55 degrees Celsius. We were hot, we were miserable, we were dirty. And we said, what are we doing here? Why are we putting ourselves? We were the eyes and ears and the brains, I'd like to think, of the US government. We were the people on the ground that when the Iraqis would announce a major military victory, we would see the taxi cabs coming back from the front with the coffins on the roof. We could see what was going on. It was hard to talk to Iraqis because of the fear, but we were talking to Iraqi officials, and at least we were hearing the lies and we could say what the US policy was. And so we were the only people, the only way Washington had any sense of ground truth of what was going on in Iraq. And so that's why we did it. I was delighted to see Iraq in the airplane window as I left. Swore I would never go back. Don't ever make those promises because you will end up having to back off on it. But it was dangerous, it was difficult, it was unpleasant, and it was a critically important job to do.
Well, it's interesting because you, in a subsequent job in Kuwait, you mentioned about being the eyes and ears. Here you are in Kuwait, and as 1990 is unfolding, you and your colleagues in the embassy thought that Saddam was looking pretty covetously towards the country, and you tried to send signals to Washington, and they didn't particularly want to hear it. Kind of pick up that story of people on the ground trying to convey what's happening, but maybe not always being heard back home.
Oh dear, yes. We could, because of the topography, we could literally watch the buildup of Iraqi troops on the border. And the numbers were growing every day. And we, of course, watched the propaganda and everything else. And we were convinced that Saddam was going to invade. And not only did we send signals, I wrote a long, detailed telegram back to Washington, where I compared what Iraq had done diplomatically, propagandistically, the 6 months prior to their invasion of Iran. And then I compared that to what they had been doing for the previous 6 months. This was the end of July. And we sent it off to Washington and said, guys, this is not saber rattling. It's not a show of force. He's going to invade. And Washington basically said, no, he's not. And, yeah, okay. And at 4 o'clock in the morning on August 2nd, my miniature schnauzer woke me up because she wanted to go out. And I told her to shut up because it was 4 o'clock in the morning. And it was either that, get up or have a piddle on the carpet. So I got up, opened the back door to the backyard, and I could then hear what she had already heard, was that the Iraqis had invaded. And by 4 o'clock in the morning, they were already at the embassy, and dragged her back inside, put on a pair of jeans and a t-shirt, pair of sandals, and went across the street to the embassy, and really never got back to my house until the middle of December.
Well, because I know that you were effectively a hostage, and you were part of, I think, just 7 or 8 people who stayed back and tried to read what was happening, tried to get Americans safe and home, other nationals safe and home. Tell us about that period when you were effectively a hostage in a way.
I think we were hostages. A large group of us did actually sue the Iraqis for illegal imprisonment or something like that, and won our case. So I think we were hostages. Before they put the embassy under siege, when we had all of our employees, all of their dependents, all of their pets, and about 50 American private citizens on a compound that normally housed 8 people. I was the only one who could actually leave the embassy and travel around the city. And this is just an example of sometimes being a woman is an advantage. It's the Iraqis didn't know quite what to do with a woman out and around, particularly one that spoke Arabic. And so I actually had a lot more freedom. I did not enjoy it out there, but I was at least able to see what was going on. Then we got all of our dependents and non-essential personnel and everybody out. And yes, we came down to 8 embassy people and 19 private citizens. And the Iraqis just locked us up. We were still able to talk to our Kuwaiti friends about what was going on. We were able to do some reporting. And it just in one of the most amazing MacGyver arrangements I've ever seen in my life, we actually got well over 3,000 American citizens and the nationals of 35 other countries out on 13 evacuation flights. Now, we could not leave the compound. We did not have electricity. We didn't have plumbing. We didn't have much of anything. But we did manage, with some people on the outside working with us, to get over 3,000 people out of that country. And by the beginning of December, we had finally gotten the last of the American citizens and the last foreign nationals out on an evacuation flight. The UN had already given Saddam the 45-day warning bell to get out of Iraq, and clearly he wasn't. And we went back to Washington and said, we've kind of done what we were there for 2 reasons. One was protection of American citizens, and we had accomplished that. And 2 was keeping the embassy nominally open as a clear indication that the United States did not recognize the Iraqi annexation of Kuwait. And at that point, by December, all the citizens are out, and we have 750,000 troops from 30 countries all ready for, we had Desert Shield. We were about to do Desert Storm, and we said, basically, our job here is done. Can we go home? And the department said, yeah, actually, we would like to get you out of there, because when Desert Storm starts, we would like you guys not to be there for the, opening round of the war. And one of my other jobs as a hostage was I was the point of contact with the Iraqi occupation people. And so one day I called them. I'm the hostage, and I called them and said, we're planning on leaving. And the Department of State has arranged an airplane for, I don't know, December 15th. And so, which was a Thursday. I know it was a Thursday. So we would like you all to send a bus to pick us up at 9:00 in the morning because we're catching a flight out. I'm the hostage. They're the jailers. And I'm telling them, by the way, bus this day, this time, this place, because I have a plane to catch. It was just wonderful. It was just, and we didn't know how we were going to leave Kuwait. We didn't even know if we would leave Kuwait alive. The idea that we just kind of told them what we had decided to do, thank you very much, toodles, was just great. And we got on a plane and came home.
Well, I saw one talk where you were describing the story, and it's I mean, we need to kind of take into account the personal dimension. There's some really ugly stuff going on. You have to be fearful for your own life. I think you were saying your dad was saying, "Get home. What are you doing there?"
Yeah.
And as a diplomat, your job is to make sure everyone else is safe and out before you start calling up buses and get a flight out. So talk about just the human dimension of that. And I should say you were given a State Department award for Valor for the way you performed during that. So
yeah. I mean, I was the deputy chief of mission, and the DCM's primary role is to take care of the embassy and the community. And then the embassy's primary role is to take care of American citizens and American interests. And so, I had to be sure that we got everybody out, that Americans were safe, which is one of the reasons that before the siege, I was out in the city going through Iraqi checkpoints, trying to figure out how to get people in. When we were still able to bring people into the embassy in the early days, we might have a high-rise building with with 10 American families. I need to get them into the embassy to be safe, but I don't know how safe it is out there for them to move. And having to make that decision, okay, you guys get in your cars now, come to the embassy, when I don't completely know that it's safe. Am I bringing them to the embassy, or am I turning them over to the Iraqis? And boy, every time a convoy would come onto the compound, I would almost collapse, because of the sheer fear. While we were hostages, as I said, we had no electricity, no plumbing, no fresh food. Yes, I ate tuna fish for 2 meals a day for 137 days. No, I do not eat tuna fish either, nor do my cats. We are a tuna-free zone. We did not know how we were going to get out. We did not at any point, there are 27 of us. At any point, the Iraqis could have come in and taken us away as human shields. At any point, they could have just dropped an artillery shell on us. They could have done anything. We were totally defenseless. And to be honest, the U.S. military couldn't have gotten to us in time. And this is, again, there was a lot of MacGyver going on. The U.S. government was a little worried about us, and they were really concerned about the Iraqis just coming in and taking us away as human shields, and we wouldn't have any way of letting Washington know. So there was a parking lot, no tree cover because it's Kuwait, and we got a whole bunch of Xerox paper boxes, about this big. We all got those. We lined all of them with aluminum foil, and we also found this obnoxiously red blanket. And we put those out in the parking lot. And what all 27 people, everybody knew that if for some reason the Iraqis came, it's time for you to go and play human shield, that we were supposed to knock the boxes apart and pick up the blanket and drop it someplace, because they did have a satellite watching. So if the satellite suddenly did not see this weird configuration of boxes and didn't see the blanket, they would know that something had happened to us. That's the best we could do, is let Washington know we were in trouble. But Washington couldn't come get us. They were going to evacuate us, this wild special operations thing to come get us at minute 1 of Desert Storm to get us out of there. But they couldn't come in and get us before. We, 5-6 months, we've all gone through a year of lockdown now. But we did this for 6 months, and again, with no power, no plumbing, no nothing. People didn't, everybody collapsed at some point. Everybody did. And one of my jobs as the deputy was, for example, if you were one of my fellow hostages and you just suddenly imploded or exploded, people went 2 different ways. Everybody kind of had their buddy, as just human nature. I would go to your buddy and say, John's not coping. There were 2, do I find something for him to do, or do I leave him alone? And your job as the buddy was to say, he just really needs some time alone, or no, we've got to come up with something for him to do. And I would make up something. And then, of course, when your buddy collapsed, I would go to you and say, okay, what do we do? The very last person that you thought about, to be honest, is yourself. My job was to make sure that everybody else was okay. And every once in a while, I would take a day off and I would go sit by myself. And, that's how I managed me. But your job is everyone else, everything else. You are last. And I will tell you just one little story about that, is that there was this special ops thing to come and, rescue us. And I got to know the special ops guys afterwards, because I was the coordinator for counterterrorism. And they said, yeah, by the way, we have this plan. And they said, we know all about you. Well, because they said, we need to figure out, when the helicopters come in to evacuate everybody. They said, we knew our orders were that you and the ambassador were the first 2 on the helicopter. But they said, everybody we talked to who knew you said she will absolutely refuse to get on the helicopter until everyone else is on. And I said, yeah, that's right. And I said, well, what are you going to do about it? And they said, we practice picking you up and carrying you into the helicopter. There was a woman in the U.S. Army whose only job was in the exercises, the practice runs. Her only job was to be picked up and physically put on a helicopter. And I said, that's the nicest thing anyone's ever said about me.
Well, let's move ahead about a decade to your time as ambassador to Yemen, because you talk about sort of the loneliness of being in charge. I mean, here you are in charge of a country in a hugely important part of the world during a very fraught time. During your time there was the bombing of the USS Cole. An investigation ensued. How do you look back on that time at Yemen? What was that like?
God, in some ways that was, that's a hard one to really talk about, just in the sense that it was totally different in many ways from Kuwait. In Kuwait, we had to manage an external threat, the Iraqis, and how do you keep people safe and sane? With the Cole, the whole focus was not the incident. The incident had happened. It was done. immediately. It was managing the U.S. government response. We had no permanent presence in Aden before the coal, although I'd asked Washington if we could, but that's a different story. And we went from basically no presence to 350 Americans in almost no time at all. Where do you put them? How do you manage them? And every component of the US government that was there had their own agenda. The Navy, keep the ship from sinking, which it almost did a couple of times, keep the ship from sinking, recover the 17 casualties, and take care of the wounded. And that's their job. The Marines came in full battle rattle to keep everybody safe. The CIA arrived in force because what happened, who did it, so we don't keep it, so we can keep it from happening again. And then the FBI and NCIS, and I lost track, came in to investigate the crime. The problem was, and we were doing this in a sovereign country, and a sovereign-friendly country, by the way, not a hostile environment, and trying to get through this idea that we had a hostile event, but we don't have a hostile environment. Very different. So we have to keep the Yemenis engaged as well. It's their country. Well, the FBI saw the ship, the coal, as a crime scene. And they want to basically put yellow tape all around it and do their investigation. To the Navy, it's their ship, it's their crew, it's their dead, their wounded, and they have their own agenda. The FBI is looking for evidence of a crime for prosecution. The CIA is looking for intelligence to preempt the next attack. Those all run smack into each other. And then the Marines' idea of keeping us all safe is that we would all stay in the Aden Hotel, which we had taken over, and be perfectly safe. Well, no. Intelligence needs to be out there. FBI needs to be out there. Navy needs to be out there. I need to be out there. And so trying to keep the various pieces of the US government working, at least not in conflict with each other, preferably in cooperation with each other and in collaboration with the Yemenis. That is a challenge. And I basically moved my office to Aden. I basically moved out of Sana'a and moved down to Aden to manage investigation, intelligence, force protection, and the ship.
Was it, I mean, there were so many things going on. There were pressures from Washington. And I know there was an FBI presence that was extremely robust and sometimes seemed to think that they were in charge of American diplomacy rather than you. I mean, how do you think ultimately it settled out? I mean, do you feel like you managed it as best you could, or how do you look back on that experience?
I personally, I look back on it quite well. The ship did not sink, and we were able to recover the ship. We got the 17 remains returned in a dignified manner, befitting. Of the wounded, we lost none of the wounded. And that was a large part because my embassy was able to marshal contacts in the hospitals in Aden and also the French military hospital in Djibouti that sent a hospital plane. We did not lose anybody to violence. So the force protection, everybody was safe. Intel guys got to do their job. And with the FBI, we did not have a problem with the FBI. We had a problem with one FBI agent. And I want to make it very clear that it was not an agency-wide problem. It was one person. And one of the challenges for me as the ambassador is, as I said, everybody comes in with their agendas, and the agendas are all very important to them and credible. I have to keep them in balance. And, you know, my big chit was, there was one person from one agency who did walk into my office, such as it was, and said, "I'm here, I'm now in charge." Well, you only represent one of the 5 or 6 agencies who are here. So what do you mean you're in charge? I'm the personal representative of the Attorney General. I said, hot diggity damn. I'm the personal representative of the president. Guess what? And I said, I'm not here to stop you. I'm here to make it happen. I'm to facilitate. I don't do prosecutions. I don't do intelligence gathering. I have no idea how to keep a ship from sinking. I don't do that. What I do is make it all happen or allow it to happen. And I would say that 99.9% of the people who were there said, yes, somebody needs to coordinate this circus of people and make it happen. But it meant that I probably spent as much time negotiating between the various elements of the US government on the ground as I did talking to the Yemenis.
Well, Ambassador, let's broaden this discussion to just maybe kind of talk about the career of a diplomat. And you've given some wonderful talks on this. And one of the points you make is that you say, it's been a challenging career. There have been some really, really hard days, but you could not imagine yourself doing anything else. Having been in this arena for 3 decades or so, what are some of your takeaways? What do you remember most about working in that day-to-day realm?
Yeah, to be honest, I had a life that as a 15-year-old in the San Fernando Valley, I could not have imagined. Literally, it was unimaginable. What kept me, and I thought I was going to stay for 10 years, and I stayed for 33. What kept me was not, being a hostage and all this other stuff is great stories, but it's not real. It's part of diplomacy. It's knowing every day that what I did made a difference. I might not always know exactly, but that I was working on, even as a junior officer, certainly as I went up the chain, that these were issues of importance. And they were of importance not in some cold chessboard grand strategy way, but every decision affected a person or 2 or 3 or 4. If I gave a student visa, that changed somebody's life. If I didn't give them the student visa, that changed their life. And then you start taking, it just the order of magnitude goes up. There were days when I thought I was doing kind of stupid stuff, but that's in any job. There were days of dealing with my own bureaucracy, and that's any job. But I always knew that without a sense of self-importance, I was always aware of the importance of what I was doing, that it mattered. It mattered in ways I didn't always know, but it mattered. That I knew why I got up at 4:30 in the morning. Would sometimes have that little bit of a charge that I would pick up the Washington Post and kind of go, I actually know the real story behind that. Or I helped that journalist write that story. Deep background is a wonderful invention. It was consequential. It had purpose. And I think, every job has purpose. We've redefined what an essential worker is over the last year. But diplomacy is intellectually challenging. You're trying to understand. You need to take all the skills of a journalist and an academic. You need to understand, what is the issue? What are the factors? Why is this happening? Who are the players? Take all of that and be able to articulate it like a good journalist or a good academic would do. But then you have to come up with what do we do about this? What can we do about this? What should we do about this? What can we do about this? And then you have to figure out, okay, make it happen. And so it's intellectually always unbelievably fascinating. But then it has this implementation phase that you're doing something and you can see it. And you can take it from idea through analysis, recommendations to bingo. I did something, or we did something. And it was also, it was great. I loved it. I could not have imagined my life ever. And I still look around my room and kind of go, holy tadpoles, you did all that? You went all those places? You got to be involved in, this big issue. And, I had to go in and lobby on behalf of Washington State apples. And then my next meeting would be counterterrorism cooperation with Yemen. And then the one after that would be talking to women on how you get into politics or something. And you would do all of that in one day. And you had to be able to do all of it. So, yeah.
Well, you've talked about just how diplomats need to combine both kind of an introvert's ability to take things in and absorb, and an extrovert's ability to project and defend and explain. And I want to actually read something. There's, George Shultz passed away.
Yeah.
Recently. There's been a lot of tributes, but I want to read a couple sentences by David Ignatius and kind of have you play off it, because it struck me. He's talking about Shultz, and he said, like most secretaries of state, he could be a brilliant talker, but his most intimidating skills were his ability to keep his mouth shut, maintaining a glacial, withering silence more devastating than any verbal riposte. It was part of his intellectual edge that made Shultz one of the most important public servants of his generation. Shultz could be a genial companion and social lion, but a foolish question or a half-baked idea would draw that chilling silence and the 1,000-yard stare. Talk about just play off that.
Any diplomat would love to have that on their tombstone. For those of you who know the Myers-Briggs thingy, something like 4% of the American population are INTJs, introverts, intuitives, and something like 70% of the foreign services. We're all a bunch of screaming introverts. We love to noodle issues and play games with the what ifs. But the other side of diplomacy, and a core part of it, is the ability to build relationships. Not necessarily friendships, but relationships. So you have to be a situational extrovert while you're a screaming introvert. And as a boss of mine told me when I was very young, you get paid as much to listen as to talk. And if you're smart, you listen a lot and you ask questions a lot. And you let the other person lead the conversation and pretty much lead you to how you're going to deal with something. And so, yeah, yes, I've chattered endlessly in this conversation, but when I'm in work mode, asking the question, listening hard, what's being said, what's not being said, and yeah, not always reacting, at least not more verbally than a stony stare. I know my staff even talks about, they'll say something, they just get what they call the look. It's like, I'm not even going to respond to that. It's just like, okay, moving on.
Well, let's talk about
Schultz.
Okay. Well, let's talk about the institute that you direct, the Institute for the Study of Diplomacy at Georgetown. It was created, I think, in '78, as I understand it. Tell us about its mission, how it connects to Georgetown University as a whole, to the Foreign Service School, which is one of the best in the country. Tell us about what you're doing now.
Well, we were established '78, to serve as a nexus between the academic world and the world of the practitioner, which particularly if you're situated in Washington, you've got not just Georgetown, but we've got 5 or 6, first-class universities. And then you've got a town full of practitioners and policy wonks and other strange people. They don't tend to talk to each other, and they actually tend to talk past each other. And so you've got these people who are doing this deep dive analysis, and we need the good professors and the academics, but then you've got the practitioner who generally is sort of moving at Mach speed, trying to keep up with an issue and doesn't have time to really dig down. Our job is to try to bring them together, so that the academic and the practitioner can learn from each other and be better, each of them. We also work very closely. I established a certificate in diplomatic studies 7 years ago, which was really to help students do some of this theory to practice work themselves, or to understand how to take the theory that they've been taught and put it into a practical application and take it from the analysis to the recommendations going forward. And so we work, and it's not just with American students who want to go into the Foreign Service. I'd say probably 35% of our certificate students are international students. And even among the Americans, they go into NGOs, they go to think tanks. But you have to understand that theory to practice nexus, and that's what we really focus on. And we do it in a lot of different ways, but theory to practice, analysis to implementation.
Well, one of your programs, I would commend people to look at your website, because it's some wonderfully interesting programs, case studies, 250 or so case studies that I think are kind of a central component. But one thing that struck me particularly was, I know you have the Donald McHenry Global Public Service Fellowship. And Ambassador McHenry is a graduate of SIU. He's a friend of the Institute. Tell us about that program. Yes.
Don is a wonderful person, as you know, and a brilliant practitioner. And he wanted a legacy program, and he wanted us to run it. And what we're looking for with this program, and it's only 5 fellows a year who get a full ride to 2-year scholarship. We're looking for those students who, beyond just being good practitioners or even great practitioners, we'd like to think we produce great practitioners, but we'll just take practitioner, who really understand and can see that transformational change, who are looking at something a little bit bigger, something that's connecting dots that people aren't quite connecting yet. And they really want to go out and do something special. And it's very hard to define, but I know since you've been at a university, every once in a while there's that student who's different. And you couldn't define it, you couldn't describe it really, but their brains work slightly differently. And that's the students we're looking for in order to help support them, give them the encouragement, the support, and help them on their intellectual skills to take that and take it a step further. We're only in our first year, but the people that we have selected are just amazing.
Great. Well, I will keep an eye on that.
That I want to mention, in case you're not going to, is we also have this thing called the Diverse Diplomacy Leaders Series. And we started that 3 years ago because there were so many young people who were looking to go into diplomacy who didn't necessarily see themselves, even though the Foreign Service looks a whole lot better than when I came in. And so we've started doing these interviews, very much like you're doing with me today, with people like Linda Thomas Greenfield and Uzra Zaya and Lino Gutierrez. And we did a panel on LGBT. And it's so that people like your students who, do I have a place in diplomacy? I don't see myself. What does it mean? What are the challenges? What are the opportunities? And we've been doing these things for 3 years now. And that's also on our website. And I really commend that to your students who maybe are not lucky enough to have that person come meet you when you're 15 and tell you, yeah, this is something you can do.
Well, let's talk a little bit about just sort of where American diplomacy is right now. And I actually was looking at your website and I saw a speech that Ambassador Marie Yovanovitch gave a year ago. I think it must have been just before COVID hit and shut things down, because it seemed like it was a live event. I think she actually gave a shout out to Ambassador McHenry. But she said a couple of things that were really grabbed me. She was talking about just a training of diplomats. And she said, our adversaries groomed their diplomats for years. We're doing better, but we send our diplomats out with little training, hope they'll learn on the job. Our adversaries have timelines and decades and centuries. Our timelines are bound by this election cycle, this budget cycle. We need to play the long game in order to keep the peace and our prosperity. Reflect on that if you would.
Yeah. Yes. That was the end of February last year. And what we didn't know, it's the last live event for almost 18 months, if we're lucky. And it couldn't have been better, giving the award to Masha, as you could tell from the video, thunderous support. We don't train our diplomats the way either our friends or our adversaries do. We don't even train our diplomats the way that many developing countries do. We kind of assume that we should be able to assume you've got the basic intellectual skills, but we don't do anything else. And you learn by watching, the masters. You're a note taker to George Shultz, and you can kind of watch, how he uses silence. The problem that we've had is that we've had several major contractions in hiring, followed by a major, surge in hiring. And that sort of tiered gurus that you could learn from is all out of whack. And so it was probably a good model at a certain point, but it's out of whack. So we don't train our people the way we should. We don't develop them the way we should. And one of the reasons is that Congress has never funded the State Department the way it should. In order to really do training, you have to have what's called a training float, which is like 20% more hires than you have positions, so that you can have people into training. We operate at 85% of hiring ceiling. So we not only don't have a float, we have an anchor. And so people can't get trained. And we've held on to getting language training, which is one of our strong suits, but we also don't develop our officers in any meaningful way. I think one of the places where we truly have fallen behind in a way that does hurt us, is going to hurt us, is that we don't put a lot of emphasis on multilateral diplomacy. We still run around doing, we think diplomacy is bilateral and that we're the indispensable country and, that's all you need. And that's never been true, ever in our history. But it's complete hogwash now. And we don't, like a lot of foreign services, all of their junior officers go through either 2 years at the UN or in Geneva, or it might even be at ASEAN headquarters, but it's some multilateral institution. And then mid-level, they kind of tip in again, and then senior level, they tip in again. We have people who get sent off to the mission at the UN, and they've never done multilateral work before. They may have done it ad hoc at embassies, because you do have to talk to your allies and your adversaries, but they've never done it in a structured way. So we don't really build those kinds of experiential learning and experiential skills the way that not only our adversaries, our friends do. I think the people we recruit are fabulous, but we're going to have to be smarter and more structured about our training, more deliberate about our training, if we're going to survive. And of course, the people who are just knocking our socks off, as they're in so many different ways, the Chinese are putting so much money into their diplomatic corps and their training and their language. And we will have for example, one economic officer in a country who's doing economic reporting and commercial work and the Chinese will have 30. Now, we're never going to have 30, but we could have 5.
Let's talk for a minute about the challenges that the Biden administration faces as it tries to kind of retool. And I was struck by an article in the Post just a few days ago, and the headline was, "Biden tells the world America's back. The world isn't so sure." And there's one sentence I'd like you to kind of reflect on. It says, "Allies know Trumpism could always come back, either in a 2024 bid by Trump himself or from another presidential hopeful offering a similar pitch." Tell me about the challenge the U.S. faces, having gone through 4 years in which, whatever your particular political views, American diplomacy was not firing on all cylinders, to put it mildly. How do we get back in the game, both in terms of just basic diplomacy and also many of the challenges that require global coalitions?
Yeah, I mean, yes, we did not have diplomacy for the last 4 years. We did not have policies. We had tweets, and then people scrambling to try to make sense of it and make something coherent out of it. We were erratic. We were bullies. And America First, as people have said, ended up with America alone. And we went from being Madeleine Albright's indispensable country to somewhere between inconvenient and irrelevant. The world just kind of moved around us. And one example of that is, we walked away from TPP. And we thought, well, of course it'll collapse because the United States isn't there. Well, Japan, Korea, and Australia got together and said, this is actually important. And they kind of put it back together, and we didn't join, but China comes in. And there's now a trading bloc, that goes from Peru to Myanmar, except we're not part of it. The Europeans have kind of gone, we'll take care of some of this ourselves. The President Biden is massively, we're back in Paris. We're trying to get back into JCPOA. We're getting, we didn't walk away from the International Postal Union. There were 13 things that we walked away from that at least people counted. And the president and Secretary Blinken and everybody have said, we're back. Literally, we're back. We're rejoining. Human Rights Council, WHO. And everyone has said, good, we want you back. We missed you, but we don't fully trust you. We believe you, President Biden. We believe you, Secretary Blinken. We are delighted, they are delighted with the election. But this always nagging concern that, okay, what happens in 4 years or maybe 8 years? You know, why should we, I mean, to do something like the Paris Climate, JCPOA, any of these things, everybody has to give a little. That's part of a negotiation. And there were friends who gave a little in order to get the Americans to be able to sign on to Paris, to sign on to JCPOA, on and on, sometimes in much smaller fora. And then we just kind of go, we're out of here. Well, they've already made their concessions. They've already adapted their laws. They've already, they're moving on our word that we were part of this agreement. And this is kind of, it's a little bit, you know, we're playing Lucy in Lucy's football. And the world is saying back, how many times do you think we're going to be Charlie Brown? And, you know, if you had a friend who kept reneging on every agreement, pretty soon they wouldn't be your friend. Now, if they were your relation, you might be nice to them or at least polite, but you'd stop counting on them and you just go off and make your own plans. And if you guys want to come along, fine, but I'm not organizing my life around you anymore. And that's where the world is. So I think we're not indispensable. We may have we've risen above irrelevant and inconvenient, but we're not anywhere near. We will be invited back, but we're not going to have the papa chair anymore. We're going to be one of a community, not the. And I hope what Americans learn is also, if you jettison a policy based on values and principles, which has always been how we have preferred to see ourselves, and interestingly, really how the world does see us, and you start using your economic power as a bludgeon, sanctions and tariffs and all sorts of things being thrown all over the place, you know, for whatever your tweet of the day is, the economic world is going to start finding ways around us. We are not irreplaceable. Even our currency is not irreplaceable. Our military is not irreplaceable. And we need to start acting like grown-ups in a community of grown-ups and stop acting like a schoolyard bully. We have a lot of credibility. Going back to George Shultz, just before he passed, he wrote a wonderful article on trust. And diplomacy, like personal relationships, is based on trust. And that is your word. And that is your ability to work as part of a community. And, you know, George Shultz said it all, and we could do far worse than to kind of dust off and have a class on just George Shultz. But trust is what we have to rebuild. Not our economy, not our military, our trust and our credibility. That's what we have to rebuild. And it will always have an asterisk next to it.
Ambassador, final question. I mean, very, very powerful comments. And on maybe much lighter note, I mean, you've had this wonderful career. You've traveled the world. Is there one place or two places that you'd love to go that you just have not had a chance to visit? Is there some place on your bucket list that when COVID eases, you say, I'd love to get on a plane and go there, or drive there if it's in the U.S.?
Yeah. I've had the pleasure and opportunity to visit about 120 countries. There's a couple places that I've missed. I will say that when we can fly again, I'm a cyclist and I do long haul cycling. And so I do have a couple of long haul cycle trips I've got, but they're more fun places like Northern Portugal and the wine district. Can't wait. Really do want to do that. My bucket list is I want to do a 2-week glamping trip in Africa. That's the one place I've never really been able to explore. And I everything from Ethiopia to the game parks to Ghana. That's the part of the world I know the least, and that's the one that I would really like to do.
Very interesting. Well, maybe on your way back, we could divert you to Southern Illinois, and
you got it.
Maybe we could have you land in St. Louis. I know you only lived there for 18 months, but see the Arch and some of the other places.
I've seen it.
Okay. But more seriously, we're really grateful.
Yeah, I'd love to.
Conversation we've had. We could go on for many more hours. And best of luck at the institute that you run, because I know it's doing really important work in getting a new generation of diplomats ready to represent us in a difficult and challenging world.
Thank you. I would love to come by and visit you all in person to get off of Zoom. And so you have a deal.
That would be great. Well, thank you so much, Ambassador.
This has been great fun. Thank you so much.
Great. Thank you. And thanks to all of you for watching another edition of our series, Understanding Our New World. A video of this conversation will be on our website in the next day or two, so please look at it and send it to friends and colleagues. We much appreciate your watching this and helping support the Institute and allowing the legacy of Paul Simon to flourish. Thank you so much.